members' raised documents, brilliant.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Clerk, and thank you, members, and good morning. To Fáilte Row of a Lig, we do have a quorum, and I now call the meeting to order. This is the 45th meeting of the Committee for Communities. So can I please remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile devices must be turned off. Mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I also please remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, please, and also be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of microphones throughout the meeting. So, moving on to agenda item 1, members, then, is declaration of interest. To remind members, it's your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest they wish to declare in relation to today's agenda? Brian.
Chair, just a minor. I see there's an item of correspondence from TEO committee, so just declare I'm a member of the committee.
Yep.
Thank you. Kelly?
I'm a member of the deaf community.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to flag as an interest that I am bringing, developing a members' bill on mitigating, preventing the threat of homelessness. So, okay, members, moving on to apologies then. Clerk, any apologies?
None, Chair.
None. Members, any apologies? No, thank you. Chair's business then, members. Firstly, I want to start by congratulating the team behind Blue Lights on winning a BAFTA award for Best Drama last Sunday. It's a major award, and it's always good to see local shows do so well, and Series 3 is currently in production, so delighted to see that success. Also, to let members know that I attended the Equity Trade Union Conference in Derry last Saturday evening. Very well attended, very positive and dynamic event. It really underscored, I think, our place here and our potential in terms of the creative arts world. In my address, I reflected on the committee's findings during our recent engagement with the sector, and whilst you will recall there was much to be concerned about, there was also positivity which resonated with Saturday's audience. So, also yesterday we had an informal meeting as a committee with the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations. That I found a very informative meeting, and I know members who attended will have found the information around the financial model particularly very informative. And important to learn that the funding model here is deemed to be a strong one, and I think it's very clearly we'd all be interested in ensuring that remains the case. I'm grateful to the presenters for agreeing to follow up on a couple of issues that members asked for further information on. So thanks for that. So lastly then, members may have noted that following our meeting last week, the Public Accounts Committee has announced an inquiry into homelessness here in the North. As PAC holds primacy now, we will at this stage simply note any response from the Department regarding the Simon Community's consideration of the Audit Office report, and also just to flag as an interest that I sit as a member on the PAC also. Members then, at page 14 of the table papers, you have been provided with a letter from Echo Echo Dance Theatre Company, who have recently been informed of a 100% cut in their Arts Council funding. This is a shocking decision, given the Arts Council appeared to, from information I've received, was actually using the company as an exemplar in its publications and public announcements. So I'd like to take members' views, and I maybe want to check if members maybe are receiving letters in relation to that. What is members' thoughts at this early stage?
I think it's a really difficult situation, Chair. I think that obviously we're still waiting to hear the budget finalised in terms of the Arts Council's allocation, and their allocation then onwards from the AFP funding, but would be more than happy if we could write a letter potentially to the Arts Council for Northern Ireland, because I think they're the ones that have primarily made the decision rather than the department. Just supposed to check in with them. Is this as a result of budget cuts or budget pressures, or are there other mitigating factors? And what then? I know the Echo have now had the transition out of AFP funding put in place, and have the potential to then apply for the lottery fund via the Arts Council. But it would just be, I suppose, useful for us to understand what supports are in place for organisations who do have, a 100% cut is devastating for any organisation, and I think if we can understand what supports are in place and the justifications would be really useful.
Yep, members content with that. I think that would be a good, a sensible and a practical first step. Yep, thanks for that, Sean. Members content? We right? Yep, thank you. Okay, members, moving on then to agenda item 4, which is draft minutes. So due to a minor drafting error, revised draft minutes from the meeting on the 8th of May are page 2 of your table papers. So are members content to agree the minutes of 8th of May as amended and in page 2?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Matters arising, members, then you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising on page 17. Can I ask if members have any comments or issues you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to 5.2 to 5.6, members? Go ahead, Brian.
Sure, just under 5.2, the reply from Darian Straban, City Council. I don't know if it's just a typo, but in their letter it says the North Ireland planning statistics. Obviously that should be Northern Ireland, and looked at the DFI website, it's down as Northern Ireland. It's just that wording was then reproduced in our summary. It says again in our summary to the committee, the North Ireland planning statistics. Obviously it should be Northern Ireland. So anyway, just wanted to comment on that. Just we should, the proper title on the website is Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Anything else then, members, within 5.2 to 5.6? No, thank you. Can I ask then, members, with regards to item 5.7, the BDA report on AI, are members content this document can be included in evidence for the sign language bill as a written evidence in the written evidence appendix or in the report itself if appropriate? Yeah, Sean?
Could I also ask, Chair, I know that a lot of work is being done in the Department for Economy on AI, and I met with the Minister this week with actually a creative arts group, and I think this could be really useful for the Department for Economy to see as well. So would it be possible to forward that over to either the committee or the Minister for recommendations, as that is the lead department on artificial intelligence, and if the Assembly's doing anything that should have deaf people at the heart of it, then the Department for Economy can be aware of that.
Yep, thank you.
Should we agree to both the department and the committee?
Yeah, I think both would be.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Yep, I think members content? Yep, thank you. Okay, anything else, members, in matters arising?
Sorry,
Go
Chair,
ahead, Kelly.
apologies, I was having a bit of bother with my computer there. 5.6, the Department for Communities, the local council development plans, it mentions there about the Department of Infrastructure having control over that. Could we maybe write to the Committee for Infrastructure just to ask them, have they raised any issues with regarding the local development plans and councils, just to see if they have anything there, because I'm sure it comes across their desk with the issue that Northern Ireland Water has been having, but it's just to see if they're abreast of the delays on that. I know that the Minister had put in place there was an additional process, I think it was, to get the local development plans that were ready to go through, I think it was the Planning Appeals Committee, to get those processed, but it was just if we could maybe write to that Committee for Infrastructure just to ask if they are aware, and are they looking at why some of the local development plans haven't been produced.
Yep. Would members be content? That proposal? Yep. Thank you, members. Okay. Thanks, members. Then moving on to agenda item 6, which is correspondence, the memo for which is at page 63 of your pack there. So we will consider the items by number in a single group and ask if you want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific items of correspondence. So for item 6.5, just members will recall that at our last meeting we agreed to write to the department to ask whether an EQIA was planned in relation to the budget's potential impact on children and young people. Now we have notification of an upcoming EQIA consultation. Are members content to await the outcome before seeking any additional information? Yep, thank you. And can I ask if members have any comments on items 6.2 to 6.6? No, members content then. Are members therefore content with the correspondence memo? Yeah. Okay, members, so to allow now members for interpreters to get set up in the green room for our next agenda item, I propose we take a short comfort break. So are members in agreement that we take a short 5-minute comfort break? Yes. Yep, thank you. Okay, members, thank you. And we're resuming again at agenda item 7, Sign Language Bill update on call for evidence submissions received. So members, you have been provided at page 186 with a memo from the clerk in relation to the call for evidence on the Sign Language Bill. We have received 42 submissions, and you have been provided with a list of organisations that the committee team is proposing to invite to provide oral evidence to the committee on the provisions in the bill. Do members have any comments at this stage on the call for evidence process? Go ahead, Kelly, please.
Just to confirm that at our last session we had people over from a different part of the UK, and the feedback I have received just for our staff and for ourselves was that Northern Ireland, they couldn't believe just how seamless that session went, and the communications that were happening simultaneously was such an improvement on other parliaments, so I thought we should actually recognise that. Yeah.
Yep, thanks for that, Kelly. Thank you. And I suppose just now at the conclusion of that stage, I do want to once again acknowledge the fantastic work that was been done by the committee staff here in relation to facilitating and setting up those. And I was able to attend a number of them, and I have to say I found them very useful and unique in many ways, but appropriately so. So it was a good process. So. Are members then at this stage content to agree the list that you've been provided? Go ahead, Sian.
I attended one of the consultation events in Banbridge, it's the only one I could get to, and one of the recommendations was around deaf clubs, and that more informal network of support rather than focusing obviously on the organisations that are set up to support deaf people. So I'm wondering if we could maybe pass on the contacts of some of those deaf clubs to the committee, because I think that would be really important to hear from them. There was a few comments at the session that I was at around how hard to reach at times the deaf community can be, particularly those who are more isolated and socially isolated. So anything at all that we can be doing was what was the ask basically. But if I can pass on some of those contacts that were sent over to me for the deaf clubs, I would really love for them to be included as well.
In relation to the session, we'll try and link up for those.
Yeah, and I was actually but just to check that clerk and members are content with that, and then just to say that furthermore the committee team is considering how best to add an additional session or sessions, perhaps by focus group sessions, to allow for participation of additional stakeholders and those not yet familiar with the call for evidence process. This would ideally take place in early June. Kelly?
Chair, I was actually going to ask, normally in this type of committee stage we will have people come here and provide evidence. I actually found that when the Bills office were providing their evidence afterwards, especially here in the Assembly, in Parliament buildings when we had that session, you had the deaf community had the opportunity to speak to each other while they were discussing what they wanted in the bill. And I think we would miss that if it's just purely a session where people are coming along and giving their opinion. Is there validity, as you talked there about this focus group session, that we could ask these, I don't know whether it be representatives from all of these groups, to come together with us in somewhere like the Long Gallery where we've got the interpreters there, and we start to go through the questions, the clauses, because to do it all at once is quite a bit, but maybe if we picked out, say, clause 1 to 4 or whatever it may be, and go through that and then have another session with that group of people, it's just to have that co-design, co-production type of element rather than just a proposal. But obviously we'll take that from the team. I just thought that the communications between the deaf community at the sessions was really, because they were bouncing ideas off each other, they were highlighting issues that somebody else hadn't thought of, and I just thought that it was so productive to see that happening. Now they sort of get the idea of how a bill process works, but it's actually getting into the detail of the clauses, and I just wonder, would it be more effective to have that focus session than to do something like that?
So I'll just come to the clerk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points on that. So I have spoken with colleagues in Parliament buildings, and we will be able to resource and try and certainly run at least one event. And we very much had in mind, a little bit like maybe some of the education and other outreach work that we do, that we work with tables and so on, and very much try and allow stakeholders to be as comfortable as possible, so they can mix with colleagues and friends, but also with people from different networks and groups and so on. So that's very much part of the thinking at the moment, and we'll also think about maybe how many sessions we need, but certainly, yes, the idea of roundtable groups is very much now the next part of it, and it will be sort of halfway between an informal meeting and an evidence session potentially. So we will actually try and collect information, as you suggest, by clause rather than more general. But certainly yes, and if members have any other further input or advice that they've picked up from stakeholders, then please do pass it on to the team. Thank you, Chair.
So are members then content that the team here work on organising such a focus group session or sessions?
Yes, please.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you, members. So members, we will now need to take another short break at this point, just to allow our interpreters to finish their work on that last item. So are members agreed? Yeah. Okay, so we'll now take a short break and take us out of broadcasting for a few minutes, please. Okay, members, so we're now resuming our meeting at agenda item 7, which is a briefing from the NI Commissioner for Children and Young People on children's and young people's voices, rights and needs. So the items for the agenda, papers for the agenda item start there on your packs at page 190. So I'd now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Chris Quinn, who's the Commissioner, Alex Tennant, Interim CEO, Joanne McGurk, Head of Legal and Investigations, and Rachel Woods, of Senior Policy and Research Officer with Nikki. So Chris, I'll come to yourself maybe to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Chair and members, thank you for having us here today. This is the first formal engagement we've had with the committee in this mandate, and I appreciate your time, particularly given the significant legislative scrutiny you're currently undertaking. I've submitted a paper which outlines our full remit and key asks, so I won't repeat it here, but will highlight several areas that I hope we can explore through your questions and future engagements. For context, NICI, the Office of the Commissioner for Children and Young People, was established in 2003. I am the 4th Commissioner appointed, and my paramount consideration is the rights of children and young people, including their wishes and feelings, the role of parents, and the provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, or UNCRC. While the UK ratified the UNCRC in 1991, it has not yet been incorporated into domestic law. A core call from my office is for full and direct incorporation of the UNCRC into Northern Ireland legislation. As an independent human rights institution and an executive non-departmental public body sponsored by the Department for Communities, NICI operates with a range of statutory duties and powers which are summarised in your briefing. Our work spans policy and research, legal and investigations, participation and communications, and this work is supported by an extremely hard-working corporate services team. Crucially, we also engage directly with children and young people through our NICI Youth Panel, through an online engagement forum, as well as extensive outreach and engagement in communities, schools and youth settings. Children and young people's lived experiences inform everything we do. Independence from government is vital in our effectiveness, yet it remains a structural concern as we are funded by and report to a single department. I would welcome further discussion on how this can be safeguarded, and I can't stress the importance of strategic operational and financial independence, ensuring freedom from government interference and the ability to act without constraint in addressing human rights issues as laid out by the Paris Principles, which were adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1993. Under our legislation, Article 24 requires me to periodically review the law establishing NICI, how it works and in practice. Reviews in 2006 and 2013 which have been more recently resubmitted, have constantly made the same core recommendations. These are summarised in your paper and available on our website. We have never received a response to these recommendations. I urge the committee to support progress on these long-standing recommendations in this mandate. Additionally, the New Decade New Approach Agreement included a commitment to review all NDPBs. Our review was published in September 2024, and we provided our response to that report for your consideration. I would welcome a discussion with the committee about your role and the role you could play in determining the appropriate responses to the recommendations from the Article 24 reports and the NDNA report. For example, taking evidence from stakeholders to ensure that the voluntary and community sector, children and young people and other stakeholders get to input their opinions. As with many public bodies, our budget is under immense strain. While our operating budget has remained flat, our costs have increased. Much of our crucial work is now funded through in-year allocations rather than a stable recurrent funding. In real terms, if our budget had kept at the pace of inflation, our allocation last year would have been 2.9 million instead of the 1.6 million that it is. Our programme costs have fallen from 28% of total spend in 2004-05 to just 3% in 2003-04, limiting our availability to deliver on key statutory duties. This represents a 43% cut in our budget over the past 20 years. We're deeply concerned about how these pressures impact children and young people, particularly as poverty continues to underline many of the issues we see across health, education, housing and justice. We strongly advocate for the implementation of child's rights budgeting or children's budgeting and the routine use of CRIAs, which are children's rights impact assessments, across all departments. So just turning to two key priority areas that we've highlighted in our pack. The first being child poverty. So according to the department's statistics in 23-24, 1 in 4 children here are living in poverty. This is unacceptable. Children are not responsible for their circumstances and cannot change them alone. Poverty features across all of Nicky's work, either as a direct cause of harm or something that deepens existing inequality. We urgently need a robust anti-poverty strategy with child poverty at its heart. And while we welcome the Executive's consideration of the strategy, which is featured in the news today, it must include concrete actions and clear funding commitments, ideally supported by UK government allocations. Whilst I cautiously welcome today's news on the anti-poverty strategy, I am concerned that it may have drifted from recommendations that have been well versed, including the need for clear, measurable targets, additional funding and a life cycle approach aimed at taking a more proactive approach to eradicating poverty. The second issue is homelessness, and we are facing a homelessness crisis that is directly impacting on children and families. The number of children in temporary accommodation has doubled over the last 5 years. These figures are shameful and point to systemic failures that demand legislative and strategic action. We support the introduction of homelessness prevention legislation, as well as a broader commitment to expand affordable, stable housing options for young people and families. Every child deserves the right to grow up in a safe and secure home. In conclusion, my team and I are ambitious for positive change. We want to see Northern Ireland become the best place for children to grow up, but currently too many children are being failed. However, we do believe that if there is a will, there is a way. So thank you for listening, and we're very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. And just, I suppose I should say, given that it's where you've finished up on the two issues around child poverty, that I am a member of the PAC also, which drafted a report on that issue. And in relation to the homelessness crisis, I'm developing a members' bill currently, and it's actually out to consultation to improve the length of time within which statutory intervention must take place, to leave it earlier. So I want to just put that on the record. So you'd mentioned about how it works in practice, and I'm keen to understand a bit better around that. So how would you describe your relationship with the department? And just in relation to, and you mentioned the anti-poverty strategy, I get a sense from what you're saying, you haven't been involved in recent days in having sight of that document. So how does it work in practice? Do you feel you're being consulted appropriately on children's issues in relation to children's issues that come up in the department?
I think this is part of the tricky relationship that we have because we are sponsored by a single department. That can be a tricky relationship to negotiate. So I would say that we work closely with the department. We have a sponsor team there who are very supportive and do their very best. However, we do need to be engaging with the department on key issues such as poverty and homelessness. I haven't yet had the opportunity to speak directly to the Minister about those issues. My previous engagement with him was very much based on the New Decade New Approach review. I have written to him to outline the need for urgent engagement on poverty and on homelessness, and I await the opportunity to speak with him. But I don't know, Alex, on poverty, if you want to speak to that, given today's news and the importance of our role in advising the department on that issue.
Certainly, yeah. I think, as Chris said, there is this tension between us as an arm's length body of the department, but also monitoring, scrutinising, advising and challenging the department. But certainly we would we engage with the officials in relation to the poverty strategy, anti-poverty strategy, and we were part of the co-design group along with a large number of other organisations, community volunteer sector organisations largely. So we have engaged and fed in, and we were very involved with the development of the proposals for the strategy, which have then been set aside. So we haven't seen anything, and the only information we've got, really, the only detail we've got is from the evidence provided to yourselves. So we've followed the committee sessions. So we haven't been able to engage with the Minister or the officials on that any further. We would have concerns that this moved away from the life cycle approach. And the reason why we're in favour of the life cycle approach is that the NDNI agreement had said that there would be two strategies produced, a child poverty strategy and an anti-poverty strategy. Mm-hmm. And we were asked directly, did we think there needed to be two? And at that point, the previous commissioner had said, Kula had said, if you cover child poverty well, if you have a life cycle approach with a significant focus on child poverty in the strategy, you should be able to do it all in one. Because children are within families, children who are poor are within poor families. So it makes sense to have it all in one. So a life cycle approach allows you to focus on people at different stages in their lives, because at each stage you have different reasons for being in poverty, different root causes, you have different experiences of being in poverty and different interventions required to lift you out of poverty. So that was why we had been very clear about that structure, and indeed across the co-design group people were very supportive of that life cycle approach. So we are concerned that it's moved away from that, but very happy to engage, and very happy, in terms of the implementation and the consultation.
And the committee has emphasised repeatedly our desire to see the Minister engage with those co-design groups across a range of strategies, and engage effectively in relation to the draft. But at a very minimum, we had a commitment from the Minister that he would engage with the people who had helped to draft that prior to publication. So I'm not sure where that sits at the present time, but it's a concern, I have to say.
That has been raised, I think, with us by the officials, so I think they're expecting that to happen yet. So we look forward to seeing that. I'm not sure if there'll be any opportunity to feed in and make any proposed changes to it. Okay, thanks for that. Second one for me then, before I go to members, is around the convention rights of the child to UN rights. There's an obligation the executive should implement the UNCRC in all its parts. So what's your view on the extent to which it has been implemented currently, and what parts have not been extended here, and what's your thoughts on that, Commissioner?
Okay, thank you for the question. The full and direct incorporation of the UNCRC into domestic law is a key priority for my office and I would encourage my colleagues to come in to comment on this, because I do believe that full and direct incorporation is probably the single most impactful action that this Assembly can take to put Northern Ireland in a place that's ahead of many other countries in the world in terms of children's rights. Unfortunately, our team grapples with large numbers of very complex child's rights violations. Our legal team carries a caseload of around 170 individual children at any one time. Those issues are becoming more and more complex and take more and more time to help resolve. I am blessed to have a team that works really hard, and we do see success. But unfortunately, there are elements of the convention that aren't protected in law, and we're saying that if we got full and direct legislation, well, the first thing it would do would put us in a better place in terms of how we make policies and how we spend public money, with children's best interests central to everything we're doing. But colleagues, would any of us like to come in on incorporation?
Yeah, well, certainly, as Head of Legal and Investigations, Chris has said, the caseload that we carry, and every day we're contacted about rights breaches that children and young people experience. At the moment, because the NCRC isn't incorporated into legislation, what we have to do in order to tackle those right breaches is use the domestic legislation that's already in place, or seek to rely on convention rights, an international treaty that is incorporated. That has limitations, and there are certainly gaps in terms of the articles, like, for example, participation or the right to play, that aren't adequately protected within our domestic legislation. So it's absolutely crucial. And as Chris has said, the best legislative thing we could do to protect children's rights is incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go first of all our Deputy Chair, Nicola Brogan, and then if Sean, Melissa, Brian and Morris. So go ahead.
Well, thanks, Chair, and thank you for your presentation here this morning. You talked about the anti-poverty strategy, and obviously there's concerns about what was being drafted. We'll hopefully see very soon. And you talked about the fact that you had suggested there should be a child anti-poverty strategy alongside the normal anti-poverty strategy. What would you like to see? What interventions, specific interventions, would you like to see to tackle that 25% of children here that are living in poverty?
Yeah.
In the child poverty strategy in particular?
Yeah. And I guess just to hone down on the figures a little bit more. When I did drill down, and these are in the public domain, but you're talking about one in 5 children who are living in absolute poverty. So that means children who struggle for the very basics: heating, light, clothing, basic toiletry. So we want to see clear and measurable targets. We want to see things that impact families now. We want to see things that put more money in poor people's pockets. But I'm going to ask Alex. Alex has worked on this issue for a long time, and Nikki, and we have a well-developed number of asks. So I'm going to ask you, Alex, to come in there.
I've worked on this issue specifically for 20 years, and those figures haven't changed. They've fluctuated for 20 years, and we really need to see something new done. We can't have more of the same. We need to see some new actions in there. So we have, obviously as part of the co-design group, have been working with a large number of other organisations to try and identify what we think are key things. And there was also an expert panel that advised on the anti-poverty strategy, and we were all agreed that it needs to focus on income and raising the incomes of families, and not just tweaking things or making things slightly more comfortable for people who are in poverty. It needs to include new actions as opposed to just collating what's already there. And so when we were part of the co-design group, we were asked what needs to be included in the strategy to make a difference to lift people out of poverty. But then there was also conversations happening with other departments, and we realised the questions they were being asked were slightly different. They were being asked, what can you do without any additional money? Which is a very different question. So I'm not sure what the questions have been asked. I'm not sure what the conversations have been around how do we free up more resource for new actions, for the actions that really will make a difference here, or whether departments have been asked to tweak what they're doing. So it'll be, we should be optimistic and positive and hope that there will be some new actions in the strategy. And for children, what we had specifically asked for was clear targets and commitments to reduce child poverty by a certain, depending on what years, certain amount over that period of time, working towards eradication. We wanted to be a focus on income, and specifically mentioned the need for proposed a need for a child payment. So in Scotland, they have an additional payment for every child in poverty it's now £25 per child per week. Mm-hmm. So that's a very specific intervention that will lift. You can quantify how many children will be lifted out of poverty by that. We also proposed looking at social security. The majority of children in poverty, 75% of children in poverty, it grows every year. 75% of children in poverty are in families where parents are working, at least one parent's working. But benefits are also important in terms of lifting children out of poverty. The two-child limit, mitigating the two-child limit and making social security a real safety net for families is another call. Reducing costs is important. So we're looking at school uniforms, and we've got legislation going through, which is a really positive move. Making sure that every child in poverty was eligible for free school meals. We've published some research which showed, as mentioned in the paper, showed that a large number of, quite a significant proportion of children in poverty aren't eligible for free school meals because their families aren't on benefits, aren't in receipt of any benefits. So we've proposed some changes to the measure there, but also looking at transport. How can we make sure that some of those costs associated with bringing up children can be reduced? Then also childcare was another call, which we've seen some changes recently. We need to make sure the childcare strategy, though, is delivering for people in poverty, as well as making sure that it's in targeting there. And then finally, it was looking at whether there's groups that are particularly high levels of poverty and designing specific interventions for them. But one of the other things we would say is there is a UK child poverty strategy, you'll be aware, is being developed currently. Most of the actions that, as we've had conversations with the team working on that at Westminster, most of the actions are actually devolved. So when we're talking to them, they're talking about services and different things. We're saying, well, actually, that's for the Assembly, that's not for the UK government. But there should be budget allocated to those actions in the UK that should then transfer through as Barnett consequentials to Northern Ireland. And we've talked to the Minister for Finance about making sure that that goes directly to actions for children in poverty. And he has said if there are actions there ready to go, that is an argument that he could potentially support. But if there's no actions designed ready to go, then that won't happen. It won't be possible.
That's really helpful, Alex, to actually hear those tangible actions there, then which will be measurable, and you can actually see producing results. And it'll be very useful to hear your interpretation of the anti-poverty strategy. We do see it.
Certainly send that through. Whenever we see the strategy, we'll be happy to send that through.
That would be helpful, thank you. Just following on from what you'd mentioned there with social security and the fact that free school meals and children with parents on benefits and that there. What kind of impact do you think that the welfare changes made by Westminster will have on children? How detrimental will it be, basically?
Yeah, to take that, there's been quite a lot of work done with the community and voluntary sector over the last number of weeks in light of the Green Paper, which I think all of us are trying to get our heads around. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Ulster University held a roundtable a couple of weeks ago on this, and it was absolutely eye-opening, just the range of measures that are being consulted on, but also are not being consulted on, and particularly concerning for us is the potential changes to universal credit for under 22s, and the impact then on changes to personal independence payments and what that will mean for other social security. We did write to the Minister on this, so we're awaiting reply. It was relatively recently, but there has been some analysis done by Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I would encourage you to look at it about the impact that this will have on families, and it will have an impact on families. The government's own equality impact assessment did identify the disproportionate impact on families who are disabled. So there's real concern here. There's real concern amongst the sectors and organisations about the lack of information about what's happening and when. And I think that's really important. We need to ensure that there is accessible information made available online. We don't want people to be in fear about what might happen and when. I appreciate that there's different timings on this. Some things will take legislation, some things are just going to be implemented. But I think that is a key role for our department here, and in conjunction with the community and voluntary sector and the children's sector as well, to make sure that there is clear and accessible information out there for people. But it is going to impact, and we are going to have to figure out how we deal with that. I'm aware that there had been discussions about potential mitigations, and obviously that is within the gift of the Northern Ireland Assembly to do, fully appreciating the budget situation that we have. But I think we do need to get to a position where we understand what the impact's going to be and how we best do it, because we can actually do it here, and then we look to other options if we need to. But it is a very difficult time for so many people, and it's the unknown and trying to understand what this means. So there's some great work going on, and support services are available there for people, but there is definitely going to be an impact on children and young people and families with disabilities in Northern Ireland. That is a fact. So we would hope that the anti-poverty strategy would take cognizance of this, and that will be considered in the round in terms of tangible actions going forward.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And you're right, the communication part is going to be key there, because so many people are already really concerned because of the uncertainty. They just don't know what lies ahead of them. So certainly the department needs to step up and communicate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I can
Very
interject
briefly,
very
Kelly,
briefly. I'm picking up the point. The Green Paper has me very concerned, especially 16 and 17-year-olds. But paragraph 64 of the Green Paper is the one where it says employment issues are a devolved matter, and therefore it's out with UK government to deal with that. Have you any concerns, as Nicola was talking about, any of those devolved matters, that there may not be funding coming to Northern Ireland for that? Because it could be outside of the Barnett consequentials then.
So Kelly, is this in terms of the Green Paper proposals? I wouldn't have that information to hand now, but I'm certainly, in light of the Good Jobs Bill and so on that is being considered by the Assembly, we would need to see investment in jobs and getting, if the proposals is to get people into work, well, we need to understand the barriers and so on, but I don't think there is going to be any bark from that, or
I'm
just about the anti-poverty.
If they say that the anti-poverty measures are the same as the employment that's devolved, then there wouldn't be any Barnett consequentials. So that's what I'm concerned.
If they put money in for actions in the rest of the UK, they will have to provide Barnett consequentials.
As long as they don't give it to councils. Yeah. The only thing, that's what I'm worried about, is the fact that no Section 75 impact assessments will be done in that Green Paper here. And that has me, they've said that families with disabilities are going to be impacted, but we have, children and dependents that will be severely impacted by this, but there's no impact assessments being done.
That's really useful, Kelly. I suppose just for information, we're doing some work with our counterparts in GB and Scotland, England, Wales on the UK child poverty work, so we'll maybe flag that there. To seek advice from other jurisdictions, but thank you for flagging it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Chair.
Sean, go ahead.
Right, I think one of the first things I just want to ask about is around the independence piece you talked about,
Yeah.
and obviously being sponsored by one single department.
Yeah.
How are the other commissioners in the UK funded, if you're aware of that? And is that maybe something that we could look into? I know it would need an amendment, obviously, to the 2003 Act, but I'm just wondering, are there any other models of funding of commissioners that would be more effective?
I think when we strip this right back, I referenced earlier the Paris Principles, and they're a set of minimum standards that were agreed by the UN General Assembly, I think in '93 it said, about what makes human rights institutions effective and credible. So they speak a lot. The Paris Principles talk a lot about that independence in terms of staffing, premises, really even setting your own agenda and from where you're sponsored from. But our preferred option would be that we would sit within the Assembly Commission, because the Assembly Commission, being the corporate body of the Assembly, that would give us clearer governance and independence. And look, this isn't a criticism of the department. We did sit within TEO, but I do think it's difficult. It's difficult for us, I suppose, in practical terms. If you look at the EFC's corporate plan, you can't really see where children and young people's rights fit. And in some ways that's the difficult relationship that we're managing. And as I say, it's not a criticism of the department or the sponsor team. They work very closely with us. But in terms of other offices, Alex, did you want to comment on that?
So the English Commissioner would be arm's length body of the Department for Education. So similar kind of relationship as we would have with the Department of Communities. But Scotland and Wales, they're both officers of the Parliament or of the Welsh Assembly. So they would have that sort of relationship with their the legislative body as opposed to government departments, and that's really right back whenever the first review of our legislation was done. It was identified as being very problematic, and it is no criticism of any individual ministers or in that, but it is problematic. We could have to go to the department and ask for money to take a legal case against the department. It just doesn't make sense. And whenever this was reviewed as part of the NDNA report on Nikki, the conversations around those different recommendations in relation to our Article 24 report and this issue around where we would sit, it was discussed with other departments and with the Assembly Commission, but not really externally. So it was discussed with the bodies that we are set up to scrutinise and advise and challenge. To be that annoying, chipping or advisor, the critical friend. Rather than civic society, rather than children and young people and their parents, who really are the people that we're here to represent and support and speak up for, advocate for, So I think that's been a wee bit problematic, really, in terms of I suppose we'd be concerned that there hasn't been an open conversation around this, and we haven't really been able to articulate or discuss widely, publicly, this is important, why we're saying it is absolutely not a criticism of the department. There's an argument for, and the report suggested moving back to TEO because there are two ministers there, and I suppose where things are a bit maybe potentially more controversial, there's an argument for it to go to TEO where previously were OFM, DFM, because there are two ministers there. But we think that the best thing really is Assembly Commission.
Yeah, I just think this is a really interesting conversation, and I know I'm hearing this a little bit from other arm's length bodies where they're set up to be the champion of whatever it is they're focusing on, but also they are tied a little bit because they are obviously beholden to their funder in some ways, and that is really difficult. So that's a really interesting.
And the concern I think that was the Assembly Commission expressed whenever they were asked was that it would set a precedent. But there's already precedent set, with NIPSO being an officer of the Northern Ireland Assemblies for the same reasons that we would be, So I think there's a strong argument for it.
It's really, really useful, and I know that you can't be critical, but perhaps we can. And what I'm hearing is that you've had no personal engagement with the Minister for Communities on an anti-poverty strategy. You've had no response on your Article 24 communication, and only one department has completed a CRIA of their budget. I think we can be critical of that in terms of having young people at the heart of this government.
I think we would just say in terms of the Article 24 report, whenever they were doing the NDNA report on the office, they did recognise that there had been this huge gap in not responding to it previously, so they brought that into the report. So we haven't yet had a final response, but there is definitely wheels turning now. But again, we think it should be a wider conversation rather than just with departments in relation to strengthening our powers to challenge them more.
Great. And then another question I had was just around the Scottish model of incorporation of the NCRC. Has that worked? Do you think it's a good model? Is it something that we can learn from?
Yeah, I get really excited when I talk about this, so thank you. And we're really passionate. I mean, when I speak with young people, I talk about the importance of the NCRC, and we go right back. We'll go back to World War I, World War II, when the world stood up and said, these terrible things should never happen again. And we saw people at that time really leading the charge. So what we've seen in Scotland is a huge step forward for children's rights on these islands. In Wales, they have partial incorporation. The Republic of Ireland are currently looking at this as well, and other jurisdictions. Some other jurisdictions have fully incorporated. So in terms of the lessons, we work closely with our counterparts in each of the commissioners' offices, and we're hearing really positive things. I'm going to ask Joanne to come in because we have a number of events. We're doing an event with the legal community around what incorporation might look like. But yes, Joanne, I'm going to bring you in there in terms of learning from Scotland and other jurisdictions.
Yeah, well, certainly we're working closely with Scotland and the previous Scottish Commissioner And it's quite early days in terms of the legislation itself, but there's a lot of international research about jurisdictions that have incorporated the UNCRC, and what it seems to demonstrate is that rather than extra cases coming to court, the rights that should be talked about in those cases are talked about and are enforceable when cases do come to court. But also what it shows is an increased awareness of children's rights, that things are dealt with further upstream. So essentially policymakers and practice deals with children's rights appropriately, so that you don't have the negative outcomes to the same extent further on down the line. And also there's been a reduction in safeguarding concerns across jurisdictions that have incorporated the UNCRC. So as Chris has said, we have a series of incorporation conversations that are ongoing with Queens, with relevant child rights organisations and stakeholders, to discuss the conversations, to have the conversations, discuss the opportunities, the challenges, and look at how we can do this to put our children front and centre and make sure that their rights are protected. They're quite specific. There's specific vulnerabilities in terms of children and young people that need specific protection, and if we act now by doing this, not only will there be better outcomes for children and young people, but society as a whole going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sian. So coming now, Melissa.
I don't know if I like, you're all very welcome, and I'd like to say just Sian sort of broached the subject that I like to ask you about as well too, in terms of the lack of independence. And I know that it was like tiptoeing through the tulips there whenever you said that you could criticise the department or whoever, but what is it that actually is limiting your lack of independence? How does it affect your ability to function, we'll say, currently? And in what way does it impede, restrict or limit, we'll say, any decisions that you might make should you be independent in a sense, right? And finally, what can be done to resolve it? And I know there's aspirations there for a different model, but given that that is an aspiration as such currently, what can be done, we'll say, immediately to help to address that? And I'm coming from the premises that I think to myself that the only thing that lacks my independence is maybe myself. And I wonder to what extent do we allow ourselves then to be maybe dictated to, directed by, or limited by others? I make that comment just in the general context, but to create a framework.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a really important question. And I suppose I will ask colleagues to come in, but I suppose there's two angles here. First, I'm going to put NDNA. Well, I'll mention NDNA first, because there are some things within the New Decade New Approach Review which could have the potential to be quite threatening to the independence of the office, and we're working through them at the moment. So that would include how the office is set up. At the minute we're a corporation sole, and that's in line with other offices across the UK and Ireland. So we wouldn't want that to change. There was also suggestions to explore becoming a statutory officer
of the department,
which would be a step backwards in our opinion. And there's also discussions currently around an advisory board, which I do believe duplicates what we already have in place, and also would be more costly, but could potentially again threaten our independence on how those people are appointed. But as I say, we're working through those. In terms of on a day-to-day basis, some of the practicalities, and look, some of these haven't been huge issues, but they could. So currently our corporate plan needs to be approved by a minister. So that is a first point. You know, that is not an independent human rights institution. Our business plan needs to be approved by a minister. Our budget is set by a minister, and budgets are tight for everyone, don't get me wrong. But having such a restrictive budget really limits our ability to fulfil our statutory duties. So at the minute there are elements of our duties and powers that we cannot fulfil because of such a limited budget. And I suppose the way that's administered, I mean, we talk a lot about multi-year budgeting and, you know, doing more for efficiency. So that really does limit us. So on a day-to-day basis, there are some of the examples, the way our business plan, corporate plan needs signed off, a limited budget, and the NDNA some of the NDNA proposals could be problematic. Anyone else want to jump in there on independence?
I think we wouldn't say that we don't have independence, and I think if you saw the letters that Chris is writing to the Minister, then it's very clear, very strong advocate. There's absolutely not, cautious about, while still respecting this is all about relationships too. It's important that we recognise that you need to work work with people. Chris is a very strong advocate and does speak out and lets the Minister know about the challenges. I think a lot of the time we probably are quite an annoying office for a lot of the government departments and public bodies, because we are speaking up for children and young people, and at times are saying the difficult things and being the critical friend, sometimes with a critical bit, particularly at the forefront. It is very problematic because we are particularly in a situation now where our budget is getting to the point where it's, we're operating, it doesn't meet our salary costs. Our current opening budget doesn't meet our salary costs, never mind our premises costs, never mind any programme budget. And we're having to, we're not questioning the integrity of the Minister whatsoever. This is a structural thing. The same way as the independence of your committee needs to be sacrosanct and very carefully set out in the structures of the committee and how it's funded. You couldn't be funded by the department. It's very important, and it's the same for us. We have that same need to be independent, to scrutinise and to challenge, and it is difficult when the Minister has a really difficult task of trying to make his budget stretch across all the things that he wants to do in the department, and he has this nagging little team of people who are telling him he's not, criticising him and challenging him a lot. It's going to be hard for him to advocate for us to be getting that money, although we're not quite calling the Minister into account or into question there at all. It's just the structure needs to allow for that independence. We do speak up, and I think we can certainly say in terms of our legal responses, in terms of Chris's interventions and our advice to government, it is independent. But the NDNA report is moving us in the wrong direction.
You referred there to just certain functions that you cannot, or obligations that you cannot meet. Could you give me some practical examples of those?
Yeah, again, I'll ask my team to come in on this. I mentioned the very complex and heavy caseload of our legal team. There are cases that come into our office that I do believe we need to litigate on, but we just can't because of budget. Our policy team are grappling with a plethora of issues, and some of those issues we need to do further research on, and we can't. One of the duties of this office is to carry out research. Yeah. I'll ask my policy colleagues to come in on this, because this speaks directly to your work and limits the work that you can do.
I suppose just for an example, last year we wanted to commission research on school absences, which the committee will be aware from constituency work but also in general is a huge issue facing upwards of 10,000 children and young people in Northern Ireland who are not in school for various reasons. And we would have wanted to scope out research as to why that is, and then to make recommendations to government. We weren't able to do that, despite it being a priority for the office. We're now conducting this in-house, but it comes at the expense of other work. We also have a participation team who's helps Chris meet his statutory duty to engage directly with children and young people and their parents. There were a number of awareness raising duties as well about the UNCRC and engagement, which we have had an impact, has impacted on our level of engagement, and also reduced the awareness of the UNCRC over a number of years. For example, we used to deliver a Year 8 awareness, so every Year 8 pupil in Northern Ireland would have had awareness raising of the UNCRC, and that we deliver that programme with information and posters and engagement with pupils. We also used to host conferences, school council conferences and Democracy School, again engaging children and young people on their rights and raising awareness of the office, which is Chris's statutory duty and the statutory duty of the office. We're not able to do those anymore, and the number of our Nicky Youth Panel residentials has dramatically dropped. Whilst we still have our youth panel on our youth engagement forum, the level of engagement has significantly reduced. We would love to do more. Even though we work very, very hard, I would love to be able to do much more research and policy advice, but we are confined in what we can and can't do, and we will have to drop certain areas for others. And then also we are reacting then to the needs of the Assembly as well, and then the legislation that comes in, which we have to then make a choice on. So it's very difficult to be over everything all at once and prioritise, because rights are not, you can't prioritise the rights. So it's a difficult balance, and we would absolutely love to do more work.
Thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Melissa. Brian, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your answers so far. Can you give me a picture of the sort of cases that you deal with coming from individual families? I know you can't talk about individual ones, but just give me an idea, what would be some of the themes that individuals come to you for support?
No problem. Thanks very much for the question. So every year we publish an annual legal report that does set out a breakdown of all the cases that we receive. So a huge amount of the work, over 50% of the complaints we receive are relating to education, special educational needs, absence from school, and lack of services or appropriate provision in school. We also get queries in relation to asylum-seeking refugee children, lack of access to service, education or health, queries in relation to waiting lists, so significant numbers of children on waiting lists for scoliosis, peg tubes, all things that could be resolved if they were met more upstream, rather than having these longer term impacts and then the necessary longer term interventions. So it really is children in residential facilities or mental health facilities not being discharged at the right time, and having a delayed discharge and then resulting in ongoing interventions and unnecessary interventions. So it's a real breadth of cases. We work really hard within the legislation that we have here to achieve outcomes, and our first port of call is always to engage with the relevant authorities, to provide advice to parents, to seek an outcome for that individual child and young person. But as Chris says, it is often a case that there's systemic issues that need systemic challenge. And I suppose a question that you had asked previously was what could be done, and something that we have recommended through our Article 24 reports consistently since the formation of the office is that the Commissioner should have own motion powers, which would allow the Commissioner to be a victim, essentially to bring cases, instead of an individual child having to bring a case, that he could bring a case as a victim or a potential victim to challenge those systemic issues that children are facing day in, day out. So that's capturing the issue before it becomes and impacts a huge number of children, which would have a benefit for children, but also society as a whole. There's cost saving that can be achieved there. We're looking at outcomes for children and young people, but of course, if we get the early intervention right, we get the provision right at the start. And sometimes litigation isn't the best option, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary. So we think those own motion powers, or victim status as it's referred to in the Article 24 report, that recommendation is absolutely critical in allowing the Commissioner to be able to adequately discharge his duties to children and young people.
I'm sorry, Brian, just as a follow-up to that, can I just check how your work in that respect intersects with, say, for example, the Children's Law Centre?
Yeah,
so how do you, which cases do you bring, which do they bring, or how does that work?
Well, at the minute, because we don't have victim status, that means that although we could bring proceedings based on domestic legislation, we can't rely on human rights legislation, which seems like a bit of an anomaly, or certainly is an anomaly, and something that we're seeking to redress. So if an individual takes a case through Children's Law Centre, for example, or through an individual solicitors, we do become involved in those cases. So we use our small amount of programme budgets to what's called do a third-party intervention. So we come in not as a party, but with specific legal advice relating to it from the Commissioner's experience, our participation with young people, our casework. And that is very beneficial, and we've achieved really good outcomes, in terms of deprivation of liberty, special educational needs, lots of serious issues. But we are absolutely reliant on an individual child going through the court process, feeling brave enough, not feeling that they're going to face retribution as a result of taking those proceedings, or being legally literate. Like, these are not necessarily people that the system is set up to make sure they have the access to justice they need. But yes, certainly we work with Children's Law Centre and other solicitors to ensure that things are moved on, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the first part of your work sounds like working in an MLA office, that people are coming to you and you're making representation on their behalf, and that's important. But you're also advising if people are finding real obstacles then, and they're taking a legal case, a judicial review, and you're advising them. Is that right?
Yes.
And what percentage? And you're not taking the case; they have to take the case. Is that?
Yes.
And again, off the top of your head, what would you say? What would be the breakdown? How many cases would you find you can help get resolved without going a legal route, just by making representation?
Well, we provide advice in most cases. It's advice and advocacy that achieves an outcome in most cases. Where we can't achieve an outcome, we will bring it to the departmental meetings. We'll engage with authorities at a strategic level to seek change. In terms of the number of interventions, they have decreased as the budget has decreased because they require external funding for High Court representative, council representative in those proceedings. But we do act strategically in any case that we take. We seek to have the largest impact for the largest number of children. So there really are egregious breaches that we're getting involved in. In terms of a breakdown in percentages, I don't have that at the moment, but certainly I could share the annual report and account if that's helpful.
And I think the way that we've been funded is a challenge here, because the department we did end up getting some money through the January monitoring round, which because we were in deficit all year, and then January got the money, but if legal didn't have that budget to fund interventions right up to the end of January, we had the money then for the 2 months, but you couldn't take the actions that we needed to take in those last 2 months. We're constantly trying to deliver our statutory duties in deficit, and then when the money does come through, which we are grateful that the Minister did prioritise us, in the January monitoring round, we weren't then able to use it in the way that we needed to.
Yeah, could I just add, as part of our duty to advise government and our work with relevant authorities is crucial in that process. So we don't want to be litigating, we don't want to be going to court, we want to solve the problem, and you're quite right. The issues that we're facing, you're probably hearing the exact same things in your constituency, and we would get referrals in from elected reps.
But more difficult cases then, will probably get referred on to you. You're probably getting them when they're particularly difficult.
Yes. But that certainly will circulate the annual casework, because that will show you the amount of cases that we've closed, we've resolved, and we can come back with any further information that you require.
Okay. One other question, Chair. I'd like to ask, just in the 2003 order, talked about the importance of the role of parents in the upbringing and development of the children, and obviously that's where the primary support is for children within their family and from their parents. How within your operation do you provide support for parents or parenting, or other key organisations you link with in terms of promoting the importance of parenting and good parenting?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's definitely something that my team and I have a very clear focus on as part of our corporate planning process. We identify that engagement with parents is absolutely one of our priorities. So on a practical basis, I would engage in communities and in various settings with parents quite a lot. Our legal team would be engaging with parents on a daily basis. But you're quite right, that the role of parents is outlined within the UNCRC. And we do work with other agencies, other parenting agencies and other charities in Northern Ireland, and we want to continue that work. I think that's, and what you're saying about positive parenting, we want to support parents. As a father of 4 boys, I fully understand how rewarding but also how difficult that job can be. And we want to support parents. We want to encourage positive parenting and never demonise parents for when things can go wrong. But I don't know, colleagues, if you want to add comment.
Just one thing that we would say is that from our experience, parents are the strongest advocates for children and their rights. that we come across, you know, in terms of Joanne's team and the people they're speaking to, it's parents who are phoning us and saying, how can we make a difference here? This isn't good enough, and asking for our support in that, you know. So they're our strongest partners in terms of advocating for children's rights.
It was just a recent call. It's a repeated call from a number of years ago, but we are calling for a family and parenting strategy for Northern Ireland to be funded and resourced. We do recognise how difficult it is, and there does need to be much more focus on the reality of parenting and bringing up children, focusing on early intervention and prevention, and giving families and parents the support that they need. So we've recently reiterated that call at the Justice Committee. We were up giving evidence in March, I believe it was. Time flies. So we're hoping that is something that can be taken forward. Appreciate that it might not be within the remit of this committee, but certainly focusing on the Department of Health and Minister of Health, but also recognising that parenting and families cross all of the committees and the departments within the Assembly. So it's certainly something that we would be fully supportive of.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Brian and Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. It was alluded to earlier there about government cuts, and nobody seems to have any idea how these cuts are going to work out, but they are expected to put a lot more children into poverty. Without knowing the impact of those cuts, how do you think that pressure, what kind of pressure will that put on yourselves, considering your budget restraints and the fact that you don't have a multi-year budget?
Yeah, look, I suppose it relates back to the complexity of cases. We've noted over the past number of years that cases are becoming more complex. I suppose on a day-to-day basis, when I'm in communities speaking with children and families, the cost of living crisis and worries about food and heating is something that children are talking about, which is really worrying. I do worry that things could get worse. I suppose the pragmatist, the positive, thinking, like I said in my presentation, if there's a will, there's a way. I think there are people in this building are working very hard to negotiate a very difficult budget situation. But I think if we can use the money we have more effectively, it can really help impact. But
I think I suppose when we normally come and present to committees, it's not about ourselves, it's about children and children's rights. And our major concern in relation to the budget is about how it's affecting children, young people and their families. And we have been providing, we've been arguing for child rights impact assessments to be done on the budgets, and also cumulative impact assessments to be done. So we were pleased this year that Department of Finance did do a cumulative impact assessment on the Northern Ireland budget. It did identify children as being the group that was going to be most detrimentally impacted by the current budget situation, and there weren't mitigations there, so it was good that was identified, but there needs to be a way of joining up and making sure that we're protecting children, because I'm sure every member of this committee is aware of a number of really important programmes that have been cut for children and young people over the last number of years. And it's basically anything that isn't statutorily required has been cut. A lot of really, really beneficial programmes, a lot of those early intervention programmes that save money further down the line. Now, we're a children's rights organisation. We're not so much about saving money. We're about children getting the right services when they need them, but also and not having to impact on them and devastate their lives before they can hit the threshold that then allows them access a service. So we think there needs to be more joining up, and it's that's our job as well, to be speaking up for children and to be speaking up for those programmes and be that annoying voice to the ministers across the executive in relation to advocating for children in those services. So we are not going to be lightly talking about our own budget cuts, and I don't think we've ever come in front of this committee to talk about our own budget. It's that we're getting to a point now where we're really concerned about how we function as an organisation, and that's the only reason we're mentioning it now.
Mark, to just pick up, there are legislative tools in place though for the executive and the Assembly to utilise when it comes to children's budgeting, and that's the Children's Services Cooperation Act. That's been in for 10 years now. So we think that there is vast opportunity to use those legislative provisions, which ensures the pooling of services and budgets, and that already exists. So there are opportunities, particularly in the budgetary situations, which are not seeming going to get any better, to do better for. And there's a lot of good examples, and we'd be very happy to provide the committee with examples that we have been given from departments of cross-departmental working and the pooling of resources. It does happen. We've had very good engagement with the Ministers of Finance since the return of the executive regarding pooling of budgets and advice to be given to departments on that. And we also have our children's rights impact assessments training, which I'd encourage you all to undertake. It is free, but it's available online. I'm more than happy to send information over about that. But and we have made that available to all of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and a number of departments have put that out. But there are tools there. I suppose we're not asking to reinvent the wheel in this. There's children's budgeting, there's children's rights impact assessments, there is the Children's Services Cooperation Act. There are those things in place. They just need to be utilised for the best of our ability.
And on that point, we're meeting with the Department of Finance officials next week to talk about the pooling of budgets and child rights impact assessments and how that can help departments to look across and make sure they're protecting children's services better.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question, and I'd like to thank you for that answer, because if you don't have a budget, then your service that you provide on behalf of children gets weaker, and that can't be allowed to happen. The other thing that concerns me, Chair, is the lack of housing right across Northern Ireland. How does that impact upon your, what do you call it, a place to call home strategy? You know, young people are leaving home earlier now than they did when I was young, which is a long time ago. So it is an increasing problem to have the proper accommodation for young people.
Well, I'll take that one. So the Place to Call, thank you for referencing that. The Place to Call Home research was published in 2023, and we're currently monitoring the department's implementation of our recommendations, the majority of which were accepted by the department. So Health and Communities and the Housing Executive were the three agencies that were involved. The homelessness and housing insecurity, everyone will be aware in this committee, is at an absolutely scandalous level. We have been advising government on this for a number of years, and as Joanne says, the complexity of the cases that are coming through our legal investigations team, housing is part of it, poverty is part of it, lack of access to services. There's a whole area of impact that housing insecurity and homelessness has on children and young people, and they're leaving home earlier for a variety of reasons, and that's also why we need to have the early intervention and prevention support in place for families as well, but also having those necessary supports should things go wrong and home not be the safe place and the best place for people to be. We have significant concerns about the numbers of children and young people in temporary accommodation, and we have been engaging with the Housing Executive and the Department on this. We certainly welcome the production of the Youth Homelessness Action Plan, so this has been released last year, and that's in tandem with the homelessness strategy that has been implemented by the Housing Executive. It does have 18 measurable actions, and we will be sitting on the advisory group for that going forward. We do absolutely welcome the focus on children and young people in this, and also the recognition of the level of care experienced children and young people that face homelessness and housing insecurity, and specific actions taken to try and stop that, because if we can stop the level of care experienced children and young people from becoming homeless, we can stop all children and young people becoming homeless down the line. We just need to ensure those actions are correct. So we do need housing sector reform, and we certainly welcome the commitment in the programme for government on the building of social housing, and that there will be more social housing built, but it needs to be affordable and it needs to be sustainable, and people need supports as well. We've had supporting people in place for decades, and it's been welcome, a recent uplift with them, but they're key to ensuring that children and young people, should they not be in the family home and have to leave or otherwise leaving trust care or leaving for whatever reason, that they have that support to be able to manage as independent individuals, because facing housing and homeless insecurity, it doesn't just impact that with not having a secure roof over your head, it impacts on the health, education, the well-being and the independence going forward. So we will be publishing our Place to Call Home recommendations monitoring report in the coming months. Be sure to issue that to the committee. I'm more than happy to come back to discuss housing and homelessness in more detail. But you'll know yourselves from your constituencies, this is a huge issue for our families, and it is only getting worse.
Right. Chair, just a wee
Very
comment.
brief.
That was based on a constituent who arrived in my office a few months ago, had been made homeless through no fault of her own, has 2 children of school age, and the only place that she could be offered was in Belfast. Now, how on earth is any mother expected to get 2 children to school from Belfast and pick them up again? It's just unbelievable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maurice. Kelly, very briefly, please.
Yeah, just on that housing issue, the Housing Executive, as we know, are reviewing their housing points allocation. My concern is, while there are some of points available for families where there are children, do you think that the priority area of primary social needs should specifically have a piece for children, so that families and children of refugee or asylum seeking children are included in that? And are you responding to the Housing Executive?
So we had made recommendations in A Place to Call Home about the position of children within the points allocation. We have fed into research that's been undertaken by the Housing Executive as well on the fundamental review. So we've made a number of recommendations over a couple of key themes, and in terms of responses to homelessness, but also rights compliant policy and planning, and that would be where the children need to be in the points system. Yeah. As much as possible. There are questions over the points system, and I know that recently there has been announcement around intimidation points and the Rule 23. There are changes afoot, so we hope that those fundamental review and the steps that have been taken by the department over the next couple of years as well will assist with this. That's part of our Place to Call Home monitorings, to look at the impact on it. It's too early to tell in terms of, it's only been a couple of years since we have released that report. But we would still be making that recommendation that children need to be better reflected in the priority need status.
And the other last one just is young people leaving home earlier. From casework that I have in my office, quite a lot of it is involved with bedroom tax. And when a child is no longer in school and considered maybe on benefits themselves, that because the bedroom tax, that they're no longer covered, their bedroom isn't, it's treated as an additional, and they need to pay rent and they're maybe not in work, that they're finding that they have to leave the family home then, because it's actually costing the family money for them to still have a room. I was just wondering if you had any evidence of that.
I don't personally, just from a policy perspective. Joanne, has that been raised with us?
No, I would need to check. I don't have the information on it, but certainly something I could check.
It's just one thing that has me concerned, that the output is that at the moment Northern Ireland Assembly is paying the equivalent amount of money, but when a child leaves school and isn't in work, then they're liable for the rent for that room that they live in, and they just don't have money for it. So
well, if it's okay, I would love to pick up with you just on that, in terms of the monitoring and what we can advise then going forward, especially with the Housing Executive, if that's okay. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Even in writing.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks. Some very interesting issues there, some issues of concern as well. I have to say, I was thinking when Maurice was raising the point around resources and investment in this issue, there is of course a cost to doing nothing. Yeah. And the cost can often be greater and the harms worse. So we have to bear that in mind. And I think I am heartened to some extent to hear several references there to positive engagement with the Department of Finance, because I think that is important. And we do know that child poverty here could be costing us up to $1 billion. So there's a cost to doing nothing as well. Also very interesting and well made points around the independence and the governance, and we'll pick up on that issue after the briefing. I was going to pick your brains when you're here around our sign language bill, but maybe if you could come back to us with some written information in relation to your views on that bill, because obviously there's been impact for children there as well.
Yes.
I'm happy to talk about it now if you have time, but I'm more than happy to...
Well, go ahead then, briefly, Rachel, please.
I suppose it's one of those areas as well where we actually don't have the capacity right now to feed into the call for evidence. If there's specific issues relating to children and young people, be more than happy to come back to the committee in writing on that, but we do welcome the bill. We actually have done quite a bit of work within our participation team with British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language as well, and engaging with deaf communities, but we need to make sure in the bill that children are mentioned within the bill, and we do welcome that, but that children have the access to information in a child-friendly manner as well, and have children and young people's versions of things in line with British and Irish and sign language, and be able to access across lots of different statutory organisations, statutory agencies. We will come back to you on the details if that's okay, but we certainly do welcome the bill and welcome the bill progressing, and it's very important that we have this, and so many children's rights are engaged with this, and we would encourage you to look at a wider range of agencies involved and those services that would be required.
Also, yeah, thank you, that's useful. And also just a very quick comment in relation to your views on, in terms of homelessness. Is there evidence, is it your opinion that there is merit in looking at earlier and longer intervention can have positive impact in that sense?
Absolutely. And again, more than happy to come back to you with some research if that would be helpful.
That would, yeah.
But certainly we would consider as one of our key causes homelessness prevention legislation. And we made that call for a number of years now, and I know that is, there's a number of organisations, a number of people dealing with in the homelessness sector and giving advice on that would share that. The All-Party Group on Homelessness has been very clear on that as well, considering a number of members are members of that IPG, and it's been great to see the engagement on that from the Department and the Minister, particularly since the return of the Executive. But we think that would be a key call, as well as the increased resources and focus on prevention of homelessness, which is also in the programme for government, so that certainly was very, very welcome. But we need more resources in, and some legislation as well. It's not the silver bullet, but I think when we all come together collectively, it certainly will make a difference.
Yeah, could I just add that very briefly, Chair? We've seen how the homeless prevention funding has worked very successfully in the past, and I would encourage, I don't know if the All-Party Group on Youth Participation has written to you yet, but they had carried out an inquiry into youth homelessness, so it might be interesting that young people that were involved in that present to this committee on that issue.
Okay, listen, thank you. Really interesting engagement, and I want on behalf of the committee to wish you all the very best with the work that you do within, I understand, constrained circumstances, but very, very important work, and you have our full support in carrying out that work.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, members. So, members, one of the things maybe coming out of that is if we should maybe seek a research paper from RAISE around governance options in other jurisdictions and see how maybe we can look at improvements in that. I think it's been raised quite effectively here today.
Sorry, Chair, we'll check first if there is existing research, obviously. But
I would, yeah. So we could check. There may be research in Queens and places like that. So maybe we could do a check on what's available first of all, if members are content. Yeah.
It covers both. The Children's Commissioner and the Older Persons Commissioner, so it's that commissioning, the commissioners set up to see how that's done. I know that the Equality Commission and the Human Rights Commission are funded. I think the Equality Commission is TO and the Human Rights Commission is Northern Ireland Office. So, we have those outside advisory bodies are very broken up. I don't know about the Assembly Commission, if that would be the right one for Northern Ireland, but TO seems like a better place for them. Yeah,
and I thought it was interesting the reference to the Children's Services and Cooperation Act, even in relation to for example, the education piece around would there be more scope for cross-departmental funding. But I think it would be important to get our heads around what's out there currently. If members are content, we'll seek some more information.
Yeah.
Any other actions arising from that, members?
Can I just add
go ahead, Claire.
just quickly to say the team will follow up with Nikki themselves just on, there was a couple of things that they'd offered to forward from a Joseph Rowntree paper and annual report link and so on. So there's 5 things that I have down on that list there, so we'll get those, including the last bit which I think Rachel mentioned on research on early intervention and the impact of prevention. So we'll cover that in the first instance with them.
There is a matter in this that has me a little bit concerned, and we've heard it from other organisations, and it doesn't really get spoken a lot about. You talked today about the allocation of money, and the allocation of money being so late that it doesn't become effective. Can we maybe find out if the Audit Office has done any work on the difficulties faced or the effective use of public money when funding is late? Because it just strikes me, at the end of the year, there's always some people call the Mad March money appears, maybe January, February time, and has to be spent by the end of March, and it comes out of monitoring rounds. It's not really an effective use of money. And if they've said today, in a pressurised environment and the amount of cases that they have, to get money late means that they're not able to deliver some of the work that they need to do for children. I just wonder if we could find out if the Audit Office have any research or anything about when funding is provided late, and that could be for whatever reason, is that an effective use of public money?
Yep, content that we find that, scope that out a little, that the committee team look at that. Sean?
The other thing was just around writing to the all-party group for youth participation to ask whether they would present their paper to us, if possible. So the chair of that is obviously Colin McGurk.
Members content with?
Sorry, what was the APG? Sean?
On youth participation. So the secretariat is the youth forum, and the MLA chair is Colin.
Maybe in the first instance get something through in writing in relation to that, and then we'll see can we schedule in, for get the information a little bit quicker. Okay, members, all okay then? So, okay, we'll move on then to agenda item 8. Clerk, you're content with the actions?
Yes.
Yep. So agenda item 8 then, which is a briefing by Raise on homelessness legislative frameworks here in the north, in England, in Scotland and Wales. So the papers for this agenda item start at page 207, and there's also a set of presentation notes at page 18 of your tabled papers. Before the session begins, I would remind members of the Public Accounts Committee announced an inquiry into homelessness in the north, and PAC now holds primacy on that issue. And so I will welcome Eleanor Murphy to our meeting today. Eleanor, good to see you again, and looking forward to your presentation. So do you want to go ahead, please, and then we'll go to questions? Thank you.
With me, I'm just bringing the presentation up.
Yeah.
So just to provide you with a little bit of context on this paper, it was requested by the committee on the back of a briefing by Homelessness Connect. And during that briefing, Homeless Connect outlined to the committee that it was their view that the current legislative framework for homelessness in Northern Ireland needed to be fundamentally reconsidered. It felt that aspects of the current legislative framework is reactionary and crisis-led rather than proactive. It also pointed to a shift in emphasis in other jurisdictions towards a more statutory approach to homelessness prevention, and a move towards ensuring that other relevant public bodies, aside from housing, like justice and health, also played their role in identifying and tackling homelessness. So the committee asked me to have a look at legislative developments in other jurisdictions. So just briefly, our legislative framework for homelessness is primarily the Housing Northern Ireland Order, 1988, and it's over 30 years old. I think it's about 36, 37 years old. It has been amended several times over those years, some really substantive amendments like required due to the Housing Executive to produce a homelessness strategy and also to provide free advice and information. But the last substantive amendment was around 14 years ago. So a key question for the committee is the current homelessness framework in Northern Ireland fit for purpose given our current challenges. So in terms of review of the framework, legislation was identified in the housing strategy as one of the key enablers of ending homelessness in Northern Ireland. The strategy stated the Housing Executive would like to work with DFC and others to initiate a review of the primary legislation, looking at other developments in jurisdictions, and particularly the statutory homeless prevention duty in England and Wales. There has been, as the Children's Commissioner pointed out, other bodies have also expressed support for a statutory homeless prevention duty, including the Chief Executive of the Housing Executive, Housing Rights, the Chartered Institute of Housing and its Agenda for Change publication, Homeless Connect, and also the Simon Community. So how has other jurisdictions approached homelessness? And I don't know if you've got your table papers up, but there's 3 publications. There's a picture of 3 publications, and they are independent reviews of homelessness legislation, which has happened in England, Scotland, and Wales. So they've all been the result of expert working groups in those jurisdictions. And in the case of England and Wales, in the case of Scotland and Wales, the Scottish and Welsh government actually asked Crisis to convene those groups. So they weren't just pieces of research or pieces of work that was done and just put in the drawer and forgotten about. They've actually led to legislative reform in England and also proposals for legislative reform in Scotland. So there's the current Housing Scotland Bill. Part 5 of that is currently making its way through the Scottish Parliament, and that would introduce, if it goes through, quite ambitious changes to how homelessness is addressed in Scotland through the legislation. The Welsh Review informed the Welsh Government's proposals for a white paper on ending homelessness, so the Welsh Government want to bring forward proposals as well, but they haven't actually announced what those are going to be just yet. So in terms of the interim reviews, they had common features. I said there were expert working groups, they were convened by Crisis, they were chaired by the same academic, and that might actually be a good place for the committee to start. It was a Professor Fitzpatrick. The membership of those groups have a diverse range of backgrounds. There's homeless charities, social housing, local government and professional bodies. And in the case of Scotland and Wales, they had access to government officials and also legal expertise. They were really substantive pieces of legislation. They were really thorough. They took 12 months to complete, and they made recommendations for change that went beyond the primary legislation, so it went onto that to look at policy, guidance, operational matters and decision-making processes as well. So in terms of the progress on a review in Northern Ireland, I don't have any further information about that. I don't see anything published, and that maybe the committee might want to consider asking the department what progress actually has been made towards a review. So how does our framework in Northern Ireland differ from other jurisdictions? Well, the paper, it looked just at 4 issues. So it looks at the statutory definition of threatened with homelessness, which is, of course, the subject matter of the Chair's private member bill proposal. It looks at the statutory homeless prevention duty, it looks at the definition of priority need, and it looks at this ask and act duty, which is being proposed in Scotland, which would require other public bodies to use their own powers and resources to identify and address homelessness within the confines of those powers. But in comparison to those reviews that I've done in other jurisdictions, I cannot replicate that because of resource and time issues. So there's loads of issues in that paper that I haven't touched upon, such as standards in a temporary accommodation, appeals and review, intentionality, youth homelessness, domestic abuse, and also monitoring and oversight arrangements. So in terms of threatened with homelessness, I think, Chair, you could probably swap places with me and go over this, but the definitions of threatened with homelessness is vitally important because obviously it's part of one of the 4 tests the Housing Executive uses to determine whether it owes individuals or households a statutory duty. So you're all very well aware that the definition in Northern Ireland is that a person is likely to become homeless within 28 days, but in other jurisdictions the threshold is double that, it's 56 days, and that has been in place for some time. England lagged a little behind, but they changed that through the Homeless Prevention Act 2017. So why did they extend the definition? Well, it was to allow more time for prevention activity, particularly for households with children, and to prevent that situation from reaching crisis point. It was also to allow more times for things like family mediation and financial health checks, and also benefits advice. But further changes are potentially ahead because in Scotland, the Housing Scotland Bill and a private member's bill at Westminster, the Homeless Prevention Bill, proposed to extend this for 6 months. The Welsh Government white paper also consulted on potentially changing this to 6 months. So in Scotland, the Scottish Government's consultation indicated there was widespread support for this extension, but some saw clarity around there was going to be sufficient training, capacity and resources to cope with the change within the context of already increased caseloads. And they also, some issues raised around the burden of proof. How would somebody prove that they're going to be homeless within the next 6 months? So in terms of a statutory homeless prevention duty, we don't have, There is one in England and Wales. We don't have a similar duty in Northern Ireland, although the Housing Executive does have to provide free advice and information. So what is it? Basically, it's a person threatened with homelessness within 56 days. The local authority has to take steps to ensure that suitable accommodation doesn't become available. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to provide accommodation. Rather, it's to help the applicant, if possible, stay in their current accommodation, or to help them source alternative accommodation if that isn't possible. Importantly, it applies regardless of priority, need and intentionality. So people in Northern Ireland that would ordinarily fall through the net, and because they're not in one of the priority needs groups, in England and Wales, the intention of the legislation was to make sure that those people had support, and it particularly helped groups such as young single men or single people as well. So local authorities have to take reasonable steps to to help the applicant, and this can include things such as family mediation or mediating with the landlord, benefits, financial health checks, financial support to access the private rented sector. So some local authorities will provide funding for things like deposits, and also things like sanctuary schemes for people experiencing domestic abuse. So there is an evaluation of the legislation in England and Wales, and it does indicate that this has actually been an effective tool. It has changed the mindset of local authorities and has led to a cultural shift, with local authorities thinking more about prevention before it actually reaches this crisis point. So in terms of priority need, I'll not go over those because you're well versed in those, but probably just to draw your attention to two of the issues. So obviously there's a priority group. One of the priority need groups is a young person at risk of financial or exploitation if they're, I think it's under the age of 21 or 21 and under. So the question for the committee is, does this adequately cover the needs of young people who are experiencing homelessness or threatened with homelessness? And also some questions around the vulnerability category, and on what it's designed to give the housing sector flexibility in terms of people who may not fall into one of these categories. They could potentially fall into this vulnerability category if they have mental illness or physical disability, which in terms of what degree subjectivity then starts to play a role in that. So I guess the question for the committee is the current priority need groups fit for purpose. There are variations between our legislation and the legislation in England, Scotland and Wales. In England and Wales, there's explicit mention of domestic abuse, and ours refers to violence. And I think it would be a matter for the committee. Actually, I don't know if that matters. So it would be a matter for the committee to ask homelessness organisations, domestic violence support organisations, whether or not that's important. So in England and Wales, there's also a distinct category for people who are vulnerable as a result of having served a custodial sentence. So they may possibly fall into, depending on their circumstances, the vulnerability category in Northern Ireland, but in England and Wales it's a distinct category by itself. Ex-service personnel is another distinct category, and also street homelessness is one that's recently been added in Wales as well, and that's because of COVID-19, and Wales has this no one left out approach, so it wants to make sure that people who are street homeless are treated as priority need. Priority need was abolished in Scotland in 2012, but there's a long lead-in time. Of course, you'd have to assess what impact this has actually had in Scotland. Wales, the expert review group, also proposed the eventual abolition of priority need in Wales. So finally, the duty to refer, duty to ask, and as said, there's a shift in emphasis in other jurisdictions towards placing a duty on other public bodies to take collective responsibility for homelessness in terms of identifying those at risk and referring them to services or using their own powers. So England had a duty to refer, Scotland is proposing a duty to ask and act, and they are distinctly different. In England, the duty to refer was part of the Homeless Prevention Act, and it requires specified public bodies like prisons, young offenders facilities, emergency departments, job centres, to ask about a person's housing situation if they feel that that person is in a precarious housing situation, and to refer those onto the local authority. But they must do that with the consent of the person. Now, the evaluation of that duty reveals that it isn't working quite exactly as it was envisaged. So some public bodies and Job Centre Plus and the Probation Board are engaging with this, and other bodies such as more the health sort of bodies aren't really engaging with it as much. And that's because there is existing links already between Job Centre and Probation Board and Housing Services. So this Ask and Act duty in Scotland, it requires that the public body is going to ask the person that they come into contact with about their housing situation, and also act within their own powers. Now, again, it has to be with the consent of the person, and this seems like a really good idea, but the committee that is currently examining the bill in Scotland I've asked some questions about it. There's no detail in the face of the bill exactly how this is going to work in practice, so the committee has asked the Scottish Government to produce more detail on that, and as a result the Scottish Government are carrying out a series of £4 million, devote £4 million for a series of pilots to actually test how that will work in practice. So in terms of Northern Ireland partnership working are a core part of the homelessness strategy. Article 14 of the Housing Northern Ireland Order does say that Health and Social Service Trusts, Probation Board, Registered Housing Providers should cooperate with the Housing Executive. So the committee consider what does this actually mean and how effectively is it working, and should there be an enhanced statutory duty involving a wider range of bodies, and if so, how would that work in practice? So just to finish up very quickly, some caveats. Legislation is obviously just one piece of this very complex, multifaceted puzzle, for want of a better word, and there's the paper doesn't look at other issues such as funding, housing supply, workforce planning. The key question committee, would a review need to go beyond the primary legislation and dig deeper into the sort of processes and the decision-making process and operational issues? And also, you would need to evaluate. I can tell you the differences between the legislation in Northern Ireland and Scotland, England and Wales, but you would actually need to ask people how that's working in practice in those jurisdictions, and the opinions as well of organisations with Northern Ireland as to whether they would be supportive of such changes. So maybe a way to look at it is also what legislative changes would need to happen in the short, medium and longer term as well. And I would just say to the committee, it's probably a good idea to keep monitoring developments in other jurisdictions, because there is legislation going through Westminster, going through Scotland, bit of a movable feast at the moment, but I'm happy to keep an eye on that. So that's it, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and obviously of huge interest to me, I have to say, and it is really useful in that sense, and to committee generally. In relation to other jurisdictions, I am aware that there was similar in relation to changing the statutory intervention period. There was a proposal in the south that would be extended as well. That had come to committee stage before that last mandate expired. So there is changes there. I was also struck by what you said at the start around departments working within the limits of within the remit of their powers or whatever. And I think culturally what we want to try to achieve is a situation where people are working up to the limit of their powers. Yeah. In a sense, and the Ask and Act is very interesting in that sense, and I know it's a bill stage in Scotland at the minute, but because it's a very tangible and easy understood concept, I think, and the simplicity of it is probably where the effectiveness will come in. But has that Ask and Act in that framing been brought in anywhere else, or do we know of the impact of changes? No, duty to refer is in there in England for a while, and there probably is some feedback on that, but is there anything more on the Ask and Act?
No, and that's the problem I think identified by the committee. They wanted more hard details as to how that. I don't know if it works in other jurisdictions outside the South or Great Britain. I don't know. I could look to see whether there's European examples of that for you, but really the current legislation that's actually in force is the duty to refer. And the difficulty there is it's working very well in some local authority areas. In others, there's concern among some local authorities that some of the public bodies are using the duty just to maybe just dump very complex cases on housing authorities, and also not engaging then. They just sort of pass the case over and then just disengage from it. And there needs to be work done around that.
Yeah.
So I would say that, sorry, Chair, that the new homeless prevention bill, which is a private member's bill, does propose to sort of change that to maybe more similar to an ask and an act. So, but I don't know whether that progress or not.
Okay, thank you. And I am struck as well around with reference to the previous briefing, around the perhaps unfulfilled quite yet, the Children's Services Cooperation Act, and that requirement for departments to work more effectively around children, and children are often in the firing line in any of these, in many homelessness situations. So it's an interesting one as to whether or not we have fully utilised the potential within that bill across departments yet, but remains one to be watched as well. So I'm going to Morris, and then I have Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things that I wanted to flag up, and the first was the 28-day period, and I would be keen that any new legislation coming from here increases that to 56 days. But I'm more concerned about 38.6 million spent in temporary accommodation and 75.3 million in homelessness, and that's continuing to rise. That's certainly not sustainable. How do you think any bill coming forward can rearrange that configuration of spend and to provide accommodation rather than temporary accommodation?
I think in Scotland and the proposals for Scotland and the proposals for Wales in their white paper, so they're not concrete legislative proposals yet. It's the reason why they want to expand that to 6 months is to sort of bring the spend on temporary accommodation down. It's to really head homelessness off at the pass, so a person doesn't actually get to that stage where they're homeless, and there isn't that reliance on trying to find temporary accommodation. So it's in terms of increasing that threshold to allow local authorities to devote more time to, maybe, because there's some people who are maybe going to be evicted legally, and it's sort of to give them advice and information to make sure that that doesn't happen. 28 days is not an awful lot of time to sort of, deal with those issues, and I think it feels 6 months is a better time to be able to actually assist people.
The Scottish bill is due at the end of this month.
It's actually going through the Scottish Parliament at the minute, so there's a link in the paper if you want to have a look at it. It's stage 2, and it's just gone through the committee stage.
Will there be lessons that we can glean
Definitely,
from that?
I think, yeah.
Happy enough. Thank you, Chair.
Morris, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you for the paper. My goodness, I had to have about 5 goes at reading it because there was so much detail in it. But I would just actually want to pick your brains. If we were, as a committee, to write to the other areas, better to go to the committee or departments to ask how it works in principle. And
I think the departments, the Scottish Parliament department that deals with housing, might be up to their eyeballs at the minute. So it might be a good idea to speak to people like Shelter or Shelter Scotland.
Yeah.
Or Shelter, the Welsh shelter, that would, and also Professor Fitzpatrick. I mean, she chaired all those groups. I mean, she would have probably a very good handle on the proposals in different jurisdictions. I know she spoke to the Scottish committee recently.
Yeah, because I was actually going to maybe ask after this if we could get a presentation from her, an update. The other thing that was of note to me is in Scotland, will Scotland have got rid of their priority need, and Wales are sort of thinking about that at the moment. Is that because they don't have a housing issue? Here we do have a housing issue, but I can't really imagine anywhere doesn't have a housing issue.
In many respects, the situation in Scotland and Wales and even England is, it's hard to say you're comparing, dire situation with the dire situation, but they're in a slightly worse position. I haven't done any analysis in terms of temporary accommodation, although, things are obviously, it's an issue here, and in terms of housing supply as well. So it's across the board, all jurisdictions are experiencing the same issues, really.
So I sort of thought, if they were removing priority need, then if we're trying to make sure that the most vulnerable, have a home if you're in a crisis, you would keep that. But I suppose maybe we can ask those guys the rationale, the reason why they didn't.
I hadn't had time to look at that, and that's really part of this other part. There's a whole substantial other part of work to be done if you do want to look at how effective our legislative framework is, that you would need to maybe ask and see if there's any research on whether that's been effective in Scotland, what our impact is. Is that something that people in northern organisations in Northern Ireland would support? Yeah. So obviously massive financial implications.
And here we have the homelessness sort of policy, dealing with homelessness is devolved really to the housing executive. I'm sort of wondering if we were to encourage, or if the minister was to bring forward homeless prevention legislation, that would really need to sit within the department as opposed to being devolved down to the housing executive, because how are you going to get the housing executive can't tell other departments really what to do. I'm a bit concerned that we seem to have passed the buck to the housing executive, who are wading through, my goodness, the amount of money that's spent on temporary accommodation is incredible. That prevention piece, I'm just thinking, compared to the others, we seem to have sort of passed that on, whereas they've kept it within their departments. Yeah.
Not quite sure as to where that would sit. It's in the other jurisdictions, there's primary legislation that they have through, so I'm not quite sure.
No, thank you for that. It is an amazing paper. It's terrifying as well, but thank you. It's brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you. Ryan?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your presentation in the paper. A statutory homelessness prevention duty, no similar statutory duty exists in Northern Ireland. I thought that duty did apply to the housing executive. If someone presents as homeless, they have to provide emergency accommodation.
I think it's just other organisations have said that it hasn't, there is no similar statutory duty in Northern Ireland, so I would have to look more closely as the current compare and contrast it, but it doesn't seem to be the same. So the housing executive does have to provide advice and information, but it's only has a statutory duty to someone then if they're homeless within, like to become homeless in 28 days, or they are homeless.
Mm-hmm. So, understanding is if someone like, in an emergency, they do provide, they have to provide emergency accommodation.
They can provide temporary accommodation,
but it's not a long-term solution necessarily. But
so while an assessment is taking place, I think they can provide temporary accommodation while they're assessing somebody in terms of whether they're due a duty, they're due a statutory duty.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, I can see our legislation seems to be behind what is elsewhere, but it's just that's my understanding, is that they do have to provide at least emergency accommodation if someone is homeless.
This is more of like less to do with temporary accommodation and more to do with preventing it getting to a state where someone needs temporary accommodation.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, listen, I think that's all questions for now, but it is a really good resource, and it does obviously point us in very relevant other directions, Eleanor. So, as always, I want to thank you. Andy, will you look?
Yeah, Chair, just on the point there you'd highlighted in response to Kelly, Eleanor, and I don't see it in the paper, but in terms of where you'd said about in other jurisdictions the housing crisis, to put it in that phrase is potentially worse, did you have an opportunity to maybe look at the causes? Are the causes of homelessness similar in the other jurisdictions as they are here, or what are the pressure points?
So I didn't look at that, Andy, because this is, despite the size of this paper, it was probably one of the largest pieces of work I've done, and I haven't even scratched the surface of this issue, because there's loads of things I could do, but I'm more than happy to go away and look to see whether there's differences between the jurisdictions in terms of what are the causes of homelessness.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, Eleanor, appreciate the information given and the commitment to look at anything further that we might, and thank you very much for that work. It's very, very helpful. Thank you. Okay, members, anything then arising from that? Go ahead, Kelly.
If we could maybe seek at a future date for that Professor Suzanne Fitzpatrick to provide us with an update. It's a useful, as it says in the paper, a very good starting point to find more about those other areas.
Yep.
Maybe just dovetail it with the PAC inquiry. That would just be doing that on the
yeah, so we are conscious that the PAC are doing an inquiry into homelessness as well, so there may be
Yeah, so we just the issue of primacy raises its head there. So can you just leave that with me just to check how? There is some suggestion that we can seek information. It's really rather that we're probably limited when it comes to agreeing actions falling out of that.
And we probably don't want to be asking someone to cover the same ground twice. So I suppose there's a need to coordinate that maybe in a sense.
Can we ask the PAC if they're looking the legislation in Northern Ireland, the homelessness strategy under 6B of the legislation, there's supposed to be a regular review by the executive of the homelessness strategy if they're looking at if that's being done. That's the legislation is the Housing Amendment Act Northern Ireland 2010.
Yeah, so members content.
It's just to see if they're looking at that as well.
Yes, so their focus is on the is obviously on the audit committee. The audit office's report. So we'll have a look at the audit office report and see if that's covered.
That's covered in it, yeah.
Work from there if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you.
The reason why I've asked that is because I don't think it's being done because it's devolved to the housing executive.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, that's useful as well. Okay. All right, members, so moving on then to members, are you content we forward the research paper to PAC to inform their inquiry, just on a reciprocal basis there? Yeah, thank you. Okay, members, then moving on to agenda item 9, forward work programme. There's a copy of your forward work programme is at page 338. Do members have any comments or are they content to note? Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
Just given the fact that in the news today it does talk about we might be very close to having an anti-poverty strategy, could we ask the department for a briefing on that?
Yep. Of course, we're waiting a date.
We're waiting.
We have asked.
Yeah. We're waiting a date.
Okay.
And on a similar issue, I'd like to check just where we're at with the language strategies as well, if we could seek a briefing on those as well, if any information.
Yes.
That as well.
Yeah, we are awaiting that, Chair. The response from the department this week was that that's with the executive at the moment, and that consequently they are not in a position to brief at this moment.
Okay, and we have the heritage, culture and creativity one outstanding, which I know the committee are working on finding out where that's and why it's that
briefing. We were told that that strategy would be going out for consultation at the summer, so.
The anti-poverty?
No, the arts and cultural heritage strategy policy.
Okay, so members otherwise content and with those inclusions, members content to note the forward work programme. Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. Agenda item 10 then, members, any other business? Kelly first, called me first. Go ahead, Kelly.
It was just, Chair, if I could record my apologies for next week. Unfortunately, I have to be I'm out of the country next week. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Brad.
I just wanted to check the arrangements for next week. Then at Prony, are you going to come on to that? Or?
I'll come on to that, yeah. Okay. I will come on to that in date, time and location. I'll just come on to that as well.
Parking too.
Yeah, and if I could also just flag up to members that I will be responding on behalf of the committee in the budget debate on Monday, and remind members that the Minister will be taking questions on Monday as well. So, Melissa?
And can I offer my apologies for next Thursday as well? I'll not be available. I think I'm not that sure how long this other meeting's going to last that I have to attend.
Okay, thank you, members. So then, in relation to agenda item 11, which is date, time and location of the next meeting, so the meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 22nd of May, in the Prony building. So we'll be down there for that. I also want to flag up that the clerk being unavailable Monday, papers for that will issue tomorrow for next week's meeting. Will issue tomorrow. Clerk, are you looking to indicate anything else?
No, nothing about that. Only other to say, Chair, that we will forward details regarding parking and access and so on via email to members of the committee. I appreciate that it's a well-known issue down in that neck of the woods, so we will be providing information on that.
That will be useful and appreciated. And I'd like to just thank the committee staff for, I know it's a busy time already and the issues keep piling up, but just to thank the committee staff for all of that assistance and support on an ongoing basis. Thank you. Okay, members, the meeting is now adjourned. Good luck, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Quick.